Welcome to the Potion Podcast, your raw look at the hospitality industry, brought to you by SHC. This week's episode is proudly sponsored by Bar Green Ellington for all your restaurant and bar needs. Visit bargreen.com for the full portfolio. I wanted to talk this week about something a little bit different because I think this is a natural step, a progression for most people's careers to become a consultant. So you want to become a consultant, a hospitality consultant. This is a big step for most people, and I think I'm not going to judge and get into how I feel about younger bartenders becoming consultants or younger bartenders being asked by people to consult, mainly because everybody has their opportunities. You've got to capitalize on your opportunities, and so this is more about you yourself personally and professionally, and then on the back end of the consumer or your client, and then finally a third step, I suppose, or a third chapter of this. So chapter 1, I suppose, let's break it down. Chapter 1 in points. Experience. This is a big one because your experience, whether it be as a cocktail bartender, a manager, so on and so forth, sort of spreads out. And I've learnt by baptism of fire a lot of these sort of things. So I'm trying to instill a little bit of what I know into what you might be going through if you're mid-20s or late 20s and you're getting asked to consult and stuff. So let's kick it off. So experience is a big one. Obviously, you need to have a sort of relative amount of personal brand a la reputation to consult on restaurants, on bars, whatever. And this sort of comes from how you work behind the bar and how you sort of build out your name. And sometimes it can happen quickly, sometimes it can't. But be very wary of anybody who sits at your bar and sees you making some great cocktails and think that you can make the jump up to consultant. Because 9 times out of 10 they're seeing a very, very, very small portion of the total package as a consultant you need to put together to be a successful consultant. And you need to sort of build out that sort of personal brand and reputation. So, what sort of experience am I talking about? Costings, big one. Learn how to cost. Now, if you don't have a mentor like I did I didn't come through the ranks. Your best friend is Google. So you can Google how to do costings. You can Google how to do break-even calculators. You can Google how to do pretty much anything. So learn how to cost your beer, your wine, your cocktails, your spirits, so on and so forth. And those costings come off how to create a budget. So you need to create your budgeted costs. So when you walk into a venue, you should really be looking at what your budgeted cost should be in each individual category and then overall. And then that's how you build your costing sheets out. Now your costing sheets are really easy. Once you learn how to do them in Excel, they're pretty simple. You can really build out very quickly. So you've got costings. Next, you've got systems. Now, I've talked about systems before on many videos. Your systems are something as simple as opening checklists, closing checklists, how to clean the coffee machine, how to set up the coffee machine, these things. Now, why are these important? Because, as a consultant, you have to build out every single system to the lowest common denominator. Now, the lowest common denominator is not offensive if anyone's going to message me, but you literally have to build your systems out that if there's someone who's just starting the bar at 18 years old with zero experience, they can follow along and learn how to do this. Now, I've been caught out by this very simply. How to tap a keg. Not many people know how to tap a keg. There's a lot of people out there, especially the younger bartenders, who do not know how to tap a keg. How to tap pop. Bag in the box. Big one as well. So there's these little things. They're just two very glaring examples for me that you need to, as a consultant, pass along to the staff because you are not going to be there personally. There's a lot. Sometimes you get you get a position where you may stay on for a little bit, which I've done a couple of times for a few venues now. But 9 times out of 10, you basically pass off and you walk out there, and the people you've trained have to go forward. It's a nice segue to my next point: training. This again goes back to the lowest common denominator. You need to make everything as rudimentary as possible. Simple things like 500 mils of sugar does not equal 500 grams of sugar. Weight is for dry goods. Milliliters and volume is for liquid ingredients. These are little things that I've even caught experienced bartenders fucking up. Well, actually, I shouldn't say part of my French. I swear all the time. But they fuck these up. So Everything needs to go back to how it was, and if you're a younger bartender consulting, which is fantastic, you have to go back to how it was when you first started in the industry. The baby steps that you wish someone had shown you, you have to put that in onto writing, into a manual. Those are the big things. Then, of course, training. You need to train on all your classics. So you might build a fantastic cocktail menu that your clients and the owners are like, yeah, we want cocktails like this place that you work at or this place that you worked at. But unless your staff know the classics, you're old-fashioned. You think so. What I've done is I've built out an 80-page cocktail manual, which I've never actually taken a recipe out. So it's got every recipe that for every consulting job I've ever done, so that it continues to build and keeps building and keeps building, including the classics. I call it the Bible purely because then you can say, if you have a cocktail that comes through your chit printer that you've never heard of, go to the Bible. If the Bible doesn't have it, just because it's the Bible doesn't mean there's random classic cocktails that may become fashionable in 2 years' time. You have a supercomputer in your pocket, Google it. So that's your training. So you've got your experience, your systems, and your training. Now these three things are pretty much where you're gonna sit on. Now, your training may not just be cocktails, it may be wine. If you're doing a whole beverage program, you should be coming to the client with a costing sheet, a system sheets, and your training manuals. And so your training manuals are something that, if you're gonna get into consulting, before you start taking your first job, if you plan on becoming a consultant in a year's time while you're working start working on your manuals. So your manual should have definitions, your manual should have the classics, your manual should have wine terms, your how to open a bottle of wine, all these sort of things. Again, Google you have so much information out there. You've got graphics and you've got pictures and you've got all these things that you can utilize to make your manuals think. Now, when it comes to manuals, we're going to chat about this in a moment for pricing. You should charge for your manuals. So this is actually a nice segue into chapter 2. And this is client services and managing your client's expectations. Now, I've done a lot of consulting over the years with a lot of different people, and you really have to manage the expectations. Just because they get the number one bartender, who could be you, in the city to create a cocktail program doesn't mean that the place is going to be popular. There's a whole myriad of things that may not even be in your scope. So your first thing is when you sit down with people, really lay down exactly what they assume your scope is going to be, and then build out your expectations. What they expect and what you can give really should be laid out, boxed neatly, and delivered before you even take on the project. Because if your scope keeps creeping, if you get scope creep, things can get really uncomfortable really quickly with your clients. So sometimes it's cut and dry, like you just got to go in, do a cocktail program, bam, 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 done. But the thing is, at the end of the day, if you have scope creep and you haven't been sorting out those expectations as you've been going along, you really end up with a very uncomfortable situation there, especially if it's a big project. So you have to be very clear. And this is something I'm still learning. So I'm not sitting here as the expert saying that I don't fuck up things all the time. There's a lot of things that I go into thinking that I know what the scope is. Don't put it down. Again, you can't assume people know what you're thinking or talking about. You really need to write down everything. So going in and making sure you know exactly what the scope is, exactly what is expected of you, exactly what is expected of the client, because it's a two-way relationship. And these are the little things that you really need to do. Point 2 of chapter 2 is pricing. Now, as you build your business out, you can start charging more. And so how I do my pricing is I sort of sit down after I've done my scope and expectations, and I say, okay, well, this is going to take me X amount of hours, and so this is my hourly rate, this is how many hours I think it's going to take, this is how much it's going to cost. But I do charge by the hour, and I tabulate every month, and they get invoiced every month. So if it's a big project, like a long-term project, a design project, which I've got a couple of projects that are going on 18 months, 2 years now, you may not do any work for a month, but then you might get a whole bunch of stuff. Now that's where that scope comes into play. If you get scope creep, you're sort of covered. If you get a little scope creep and you want to help out with a little social media marketing or a little bit of this, a little bit of that, you quickly can cover yourself with that. That being said, if it is your first job, your very first job, or maybe your second or third job, be very aggressive with the pricing. Why do I say that? Now, I don't want to undervalue anyone. I undervalue myself all the time, less so now. But when I first started, I gave a lot of Like, I left a lot of money on the table purely because I can say I did X, Y, Z venues. I did what I did in those venues, so on and so forth. And so these projects are more of a feather in your hat as you start building. Once you start building, and once you've built and you've got some successful venues under your belt, and people are knowing you for this, then you can start creeping up your hourly rate. But my suggestion is to try and be as aggressive as possible in the first couple of projects, just so you can get your name in there. If you really want to do this, you have to double down and you have to lean into it. Consulting on the side of bartending will eventually get very tedious, especially when you start picking up big projects. Like my Merridale project's been going on for 18 months now. I know that I haven't really been touched by my client for 8 to 10 months, but I do know that in the next 3 to 4, I'm going to be very, very busy getting that dialed in, design work, and finishing up all that stuff. So you can sort of like lay yourself out. But again, guys, like, you really need to build your name. At the moment, the very first job you do, you have zero added value. There's no value add to your name being attached to the business. Maybe you get a few extra people in there. Maybe some people show up because it's your place and you got some followers and stuff. But what happens when you stop working there or you just pass off the project? So really look at how much value add you can get from you consulting for a very reduced rate so you can get your name out there. So, part 3 of you want to become a consultant, and I always try and keep these podcasts short, so we're getting close to the part 3 tie-off, is mitigating issues after the fact. So you've been paid in full, you've signed off, you've checked off all the ticks and boxes, you think that everybody's left happy, but something may creep in. So my rule of thumb is always under promise and over deliver. So always leave making sure the customer's happy. And if there's a lot more things that start rolling, then you can really have a negotiation of whether or not you be put on a retainer or you work it a little bit more for a little bit of money. So there's always ways around that to build out that sort of mitigation afterwards. It's a big one because 9 times out of 10 it happens. You know, clients want to get the most they possibly can get out of you, bang for your buck. You want to try and do the work as efficiently and epically as possible so that you can make a little extra like profit margin, because your time is worth money. So you want to make that little bit extra profit margin on the top. So mitigating that. Second thing you got to mitigate is you got to be prepared for the trash talk. Now, I don't talk about this too much. Well, I do every now and then. But if you start becoming a consultant, you start putting yourself out, you start getting written up in the media as the consultant for that place, you really have to be prepared for people to reach out to you and or people just to talk behind your back and sort of say, well, the bartenders there don't know what they're talking about, or the bartenders there aren't well trained, or something like that. Because the thing is, you can only do so much at any venue training wise. That's the thing. You can do tests, you can do written tests, you can hours and hours and hours and hours of training, but only a small percentage of that is going to get into good bartenders, and even a smaller percentage of that knowledge is going to get into not so great bartenders. So you really need to figure out, that goes back to your systems and your manuals and stuff, you really need to figure out how to get as much information over to the staff as possible so that it mitigates that back end where you have customers who know you and they're like, yeah, I went to the bar that you consulted on, the cocktail wasn't great. You're going to be prepared for that. And then also fix it. And that's where that under promise, over deliver sort of thing goes, because you want to make sure that your client is happy and that your name and your brand is attached to that place is happy as well. So I've had some great successes and a few small little failures, but I wouldn't class them as huge. Because I keep working with the same people. So it's one of those things that you just got to keep always being prepared to be there. I think, especially in a small market like I'm in, you've got to be prepared to really, really make sure that everybody's happy, because the whispers start happening. So mitigation in that third chapter, that mitigation after the fact, is something that you have to do for your client, for the customers that the client has, for the industry people that maybe you might want to put in there in places of positions of power. So you might hire some friends or some people you've mentored into the position of bar manager, and that doesn't work out after 3 months because the owner changes his mind. Which again, this is the final chapter of being a consultant. Final chapter of being a consultant is that you really need to understand that your job is to advise and try and put your point across as much as possible. But that doesn't. Have you ever heard the saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink? This is a little bit like you can give your best advice, your best point of view, your best everything, and they can change it after a month because they don't feel like it's working or they don't follow through with the things that you've asked. So these are little things that you have to understand as well. It's like, just because you consulted on it, just because you gave your advice, doesn't necessarily mean they're going to keep it and keep the concept the way you did it. Even though you've done all your due diligence to make sure that everything that person wants is in the venue that you've helped create, they can still change their mind after you. And that's the beautiful thing. They're the owners. They can do whatever the hell they want. If they want to change everything and turn into a strip joint after 3 months, whatever you've done 3 months ago doesn't mean diddly squat. And so, as a consultant, which is difficult for a lot of us because a lot of us go into consulting very personally. We invest a lot of our personal effort into it because it's creative and so on and so forth. But you do have to understand it's a business. So that's my 15-minute ramble about if so you want to become a hospitality consultant. I hope that anybody who's out there is trying to become a consultant takes a bit of advice and listens to this. I want to thank everybody for the support I've got over 2020 already. It's been insane. The Post Shift podcast has just blown up, and I have no idea why, but it just has, and I appreciate it immensely. Whoever's listening to me, thank you. Thanks for listening, Post Shifters. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I really enjoy sitting down with friends and peers and just chatting about the industry and getting down to the nuts and bolts of what's really going on out there. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, everything on all the platforms. Just hit it up, and I'll do my best to answer any queries or questions you have. I'll see you next week, guys. Bye.